Today I'm adding debossing to die cuts in an easy way. No fancy equipment needed. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel on the first and third Saturday of the month. So if you enjoy my videos, I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started. I'm using the Festive Triangles sets today. This is the stamp set. You can see they've got lots of different triangles in the set, as well as lots of lovely sentiments. I'm using the triangles as Christmas trees, but you could definitely just use them as triangles if you wanted to. And then there's also the press plate as well, which is the same designs as the stamp set, but just in the press plate format. I'm also using the nesting triangles die set today. There are 3 sets of triangles in this set, and the one here on the right hand side coordinates with the Festive Triangle set, so it coordinates with both the stamp set and also the press plates. So I'm just showing you here how they fit nicely together. So I'm going to use all 3 on my project today. I have started off by cutting 3 tags using the Terrific Tags die set. 2 from Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock and 1 from Classic Crest £110 Solar White cardstock. I'm cutting a little bit off of the end of the white tag. I think it ended up being about 5/8 that I cut off, and then placing it in the stamp wheel so it's going to hold in place on that sticky mat. I can then bring in the Festive Triangles stamp set, and I'm going to take the largest of the solid triangles. I'm going to place that down onto my tag where I want it to be stamped, just overlapping at the bottom slightly, and then I can bring in my top flip plate of the stamp wheel, press that down to pick up that stamp. I can then flip that over, and with solid images I like to sometimes just rub my thumb over it. It helps sometimes just to make the ink adhere to it a little bit better. I'm then going to ink up the stamp using Dewdrops Fresh Dye ink, and this is the lightest shade in the Sweet Dreams collection. So I'm just inking up this stamp really well. Now, did I need to ink it up as long as I actually did? No, probably not, but this is a solid image, so I want to make sure that I get a really nice impression. I can then flip over that plate and stamp that down onto the cardstock. And with the stamp wheel, I like to just make sure that the bottom corners are in first and then go in with the top corners afterwards. So just making sure that that's really pressed down, and you can see that I've got a really splotchy impression. These inks, when they stamp, they do tend to stamp a little bit splotchy, but as they dry they fade off a little bit in terms of colour saturation, but they also smooth out really nicely. So although it looks splotchy, once it dries it is going to dry really nice and smooth, but I know it's difficult to tell at the beginning to see if it's going to dry that way. However, I am going to stamp this 3 times, not only to make sure that I get the best impression that I possibly can, and it's going to have lots of ink to be able to smooth out. I also wanted the saturation of colour to be just that slightly darker in shade. Not as dark as the next shade in the collection, but just a little bit darker than one layer. So I can remove that from the stamp wheel and set that aside to dry. I'm then going to work on the debossing triangles. So I'm taking the nesting triangles die set, and I'm taking the second smallest and the one above that. The second smallest one I'm going to cut from Aqualicious cardstock, and then the next one I'm going to cut from Pink Diamond cardstock. I'm using teals and aquas today because I really love that colour combination for holiday projects, but you could definitely do this with loads of different colour combinations. I think that's the great thing about this design. So I've got my 2 triangles ready to go, and I want to bring in the Festive Triangles press plates. So I'm taking this one here at the top with these lines on, And then I'm also taking the one with the polka dots on. This is a little bit larger than I need, but that's absolutely fine. So for this technique, I'm using a normal die cutting machine, and what you want in a die cutting machine is some sort of a rubber mat so that you can kind of press into. This would be the same method that you would use if you wanted to make an impression with a die. So that rubber mat stops anything cutting through the cardstock. In this instance, they are press plates, so there's nothing to cut into, and you could do this in a better press machine, no problem whatsoever, but I wanted to show you that you can do it in a regular die cutting machine as well. So I've got those triangles facing upwards, and now I'm placing the plates on top facing downwards. I'm just trying to line them up as best as possible, because obviously I can't really see at this point if those lines are straight. I'm then bringing in the top plate here of my die cutting machine, and then I can run that through. I'm using the Platinum 6 today, but any die cutting machine that has that rubber mat should work. So I can lift off that plate, and then this one here did actually get stuck in that press plate because those polka dots are kind of debossed so much it got stuck inside, but you can see that that's given such a lovely impression. On the back is the embossed side, but I'm going for the debossed side today. And then I've got this one here with the lines. I think they look really pretty, and it just adds a little bit of interest onto a clean and simple project. If you didn't have press plates, you could definitely add these into embossing folders, and that would add some texture as well. I have die cut the triangles another 4 times from the same cardstock. Oh, sorry, another 3 times. The 4th one is the debossed one. And I'm just going to layer these one on top of each other to add a little bit of dimension onto my tag. I could definitely add these with foam tape if I wanted to, but I do quite like the look of the stacked die cuts. But I wasn't sure if it was going to work for the dotty one, because this really is quite dimensional on the back, and I thought that pressing it down may make it less dimensional, I suppose, and it did do that a little bit. So I'm just layering these up one on top of each other. I'm using the liquid glue so that I've got time to wiggle them in place and line them up as best as possible. And then I can add some more glue onto this top one here, and then popped the debossing one on top. And because, like I say, on the back it is very dimensional, I'm having a little bit of trouble sticking them together. So I am pressing quite hard here, and I did lose a little bit of the debossing, but not too much. I still think you can see it quite nicely, but I'm just going to place a block on top to hold that in place while the glue dries, while I stamp my sentiment. So I'm stamping that onto Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock, and I'm using the Season's Greetings sentiment from the Festive Triangles stamp set. I can pick up that sentiment with the top flip plate of the stamp wheel. I am adding some anti-static powder onto my cardstock here, and then I can ink up the stamp using embossing ink. This is a clear sticky ink so that when I add the embossing powder on top, it's going to stick to it. So just pressing that down lightly, I can remove that from the stamp wheel, and then I can apply some pure white crisp embossing powder. And I like to apply this a couple of times, tap off the excess, just to make sure that I get really nice coverage of that powder. And if there's any that I don't want, like any particles hanging around that I don't want to be there, I can just use a dry brush to remove those. I can then heat set that sentiment, and I like to heat set from the front and the back of the cardstock. That does help to prevent a little bit of warping of the cardstock, but it also makes sure that I don't kind of accidentally overheat that powder. My anti-static powder tool is a new one, so I've got tons of powder on this. I used a cloth to try and remove it, but I'm also rubbing it against my top here, and that does help to remove the excess powder. So I'm going to cut that down into a strip. I can now adhere my tags together. So I've got these two that I cut from the Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock. I'm adding some glue tape onto the back of one of them, and then I can sandwich the two tags back to back. That's going to add a little bit of stability to the tag, but it's also going to make sure that it looks nice and neat on the back if I want to write a personal message. I thought this tag would work really nicely as a gift tag onto a Christmas present. I'm then taking the one that I stamped onto, and I can add some more glue tape onto the back of that. And then I can adhere that onto the other tag. And I'm just adhering that towards the top so that you can see that little bit of the black cardstock at the bottom. That's going to help ground the trees that I add on top. I have cut the whole reinforcer from Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock from the Labels and Tags 1 die set. So just adding that at the top, and then I've got my debossed triangles here that I can add on top. So just figuring out where I want them to be placed. I thought it would look quite nice having the elements towards the right hand side of this tag, but I could have done them in the middle as well. I can add some liquid glue onto the back of these triangles, or trees I should call them now. So I can line that up towards the bottom of that white piece. And then I like I say, using that liquid glue so I've got time to wiggle them in place if I need to. And then I can do the same thing for the other tree here. So adding a little bit of liquid glue on the back and then pressing that down onto the tag. I can then bring in my sentiment, and I want it so that it's all one level, and there is a little gap in between obviously where there's no tree or the stamp tree is rather than the dimensional ones. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of instant dimension foam tape, and I'm just making sure there that that's all going to be one level, and it is. So I can remove the backings off of that foam tape. I can add some liquid glue on either side, and then I can adhere that down onto the tag. And I'm just going to make it so that the edge of the sentiment is at the edge of the tag. So I'm just bringing in my T-square ruler here just to make sure that I'm adhering that down on straight. I can then add some twine through the top of the tag. So I fold it in half and thread that through the hole, and then I can secure that there at the front. For some reason today it was just a little bit fiddly for me to make this bow. I'm not quite sure why, because I make tons of bows with this twine, but it was just a little bit fiddly today. So I'm tying that in a bow, and then once I've got the bow sorted, I can kind of move it around, manipulate it so that it's the size that I want. And then once I'm happy, I can cut those tails down with some scissors. And I like to have one sort of facing downwards and one facing upwards. And then to finish off and add a little bit of sparkle onto the tag, I'm using the clear iridescent Stellar sequins. So I've got all of the sequins of different sizes in one tub here. So I'm just taking a few out so that I can see which sizes I want to use. And then I'm just going to place them down onto the tag. And then once I'm happy with the ones I have picked, I can grab some liquid glue, add some small dabs of glue onto the tag, and then I can bring in my perfect picker here to pick up those sequins and pop them down onto the glue. And I really love these sequins because they don't add any extra colour onto this tag, but it does just add some really nice sparkle. So I can just finish off with this last sequin here. And then I can use the other end of the perfect picker just to get them in place. And that is the tag finished for today. I really love that added debossing on those trees. And I wanted to show you the card that inspired my tag today. I created this card just with the stamp set, so those ones that have got the patterns on are just from the stamp set, so you could definitely do that as well. But I do love that added extra layer of having those debossing elements on those trees. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Wait, we have more where that came from. If you're after fabulous card making tutorials, you are definitely in the right spot. Our amazing design team create and upload fabulous video tutorials right to this YouTube channel. If you don't want to miss another amazing crafting tutorial, don't forget to subscribe and click that fun red button that you can see. Let's become paper crafting experts together.